Checking in and out, easy to do when it's just yourself, but when you've got a boat involved in the equation, it gets a little bit more complicated. Now, this is a subject that we have discussed in the past. We did a whole vlog on it in 2019 when we left Belatung, and we've also written a blog post about it. We'll put links in the description below, but it's worth coming back to, and it is probably the single most requested podcast stroke vlog people have asked for. We put a shout out, didn't we, a few weeks ago asking.
Yeah, we did, and we had lots of ideas, but this was streets ahead of everything else. Everybody wants to know about it, but not just that. I've noticed that they often do that in the comments of random videos. People ask about, but how do you get in and out on a boat? So it's obviously a subject that people are worried about, and we need to try and ease that anxiety. Hello, I'm Liz.
And I'm Jamie.
Welcome to Follow the Boat, in which we discuss what it's really like to give it all up to live on a boat.
And go travelling around the world. We've been doing it since 2006 and we're still at it.
Each week we talk about our latest YouTube videos.
And about boats, sailing, travel or anything else which floats into our heads.
And if you leave a comment we like, we'll give you an answer and a name check. Peace and fair winds. This is a general guide. You cannot write one guide for checking in and out on a boat all over the world, can you?
No, and in fact it's one reason why we have avoided addressing this in so much detail is because there are so many variables. Yeah. It's not just the country that you're checking into that will change, but also your own passport. You as the passport holder, it depends which country you come from. Yeah,
because if you're checking in and you've got a UK passport, your procedures and the things that you need may be quite different from someone with a Turkish passport, for instance. You know, it's going to affect visas and all this kind of thing. So this is why it is general, but we will put actual examples wherever we can so that you can understand what we've been through. So first of all, you've got to think about checking in and out. There's three main things. There's checking yourself in as an individual, there's checking your boat in, and possibly checking cats in.
Or dogs.
Or dogs or any other pet. Yeah. Might be a parrot.
Yeah.
So with you then, it's pretty straightforward. It's just like going to an airport, trains, planes and automobiles, really. It's the same old thing. You go along with your passport.
Yeah, and you meet grumpy immigration officers. That's no different.
Oh dear, it's a bit controversial. We have met some nice ones, just to be
we have
on the safe side. So what about the boat then?
Yeah, that's where it gets complicated because there is a whole separate process for your boat. And again, depending on the country, you will have different requirements. I mean, we've been in countries where the quickest we ever checked in was 7 minutes. I timed it, and that's to go to the 3 major offices. 7 minutes check-in is a record compared to another country we went to, which took 3 days. Yes, you heard that right. It took us 3 days to check in.
We'll talk about those in a minute. And then finally, we have included pets because those of us who know us well know that we had a pet, and sailing with pets can be quite complicated, and it just brings in a whole new raft of bureaucracy to think about. So, first of all, remember, coming into a new country on a boat takes longer than it does when it's just yourself. It can make us all anxious. In fact, even after 17 years, I still get a little anxious, particularly in a new country.
Yeah. Well, I think the key things here are to be prepared.
Yeah.
Like a good Cub Scout.
Yes.
Be prepared. Have all your paperwork in order so that when you are asked for each document, you have it there ready rather than fumbling around trying to, which we've done in the past, haven't we? Yeah,
we're getting better at it. But yeah, we're going to go through those, not in great detail, but we'll list the documents you need to think about before you go as well in this video podcast. You need to demonstrate good manners. Yes,
I think actually that's just as important as having all your documents in order. You are dealing with bureaucracy. That bureaucracy changes between country and country, but they all seem to have one thing in common. And that is that you're not treated as a special guest when it comes to doing your paperwork. It's an official procedure, and these bureaucrats, these officers that work in these offices, like to do things by the book, and you've got to play the game. And part of playing the game means being a little subservient. It means being very polite, and most of all, not losing your rag. Never lose your rag.
So never get cross, and that's not just in Southeast Asia, it's all over the world, and we recommend it generally.
Don't forget, these people have a right to not let you into the country. And if they're having a bad day, it's a Monday morning, and you come in badly dressed and very aggressive and argumentative, they could quite easily put you to the back of the queue, or even worse, send you off packing.
And just a word on badly dressed. You are expected to look reasonably smart. We'll go into this in a bit more detail, but just, you know, there they are in their full uniforms, sometimes hats even. You need to be reasonably well dressed to receive them and to go and meet them. We have got some examples of some very weird check-ins. India in 2010.
Yes, well, that was the one that took 3 days.
Yeah.
We just happened to turn up on a Friday afternoon, which meant that we got the first bit of the paperwork done, which involved anchoring next to an island, getting from that island to the mainland, travelling by tuk-tuk to get to the various offices. One office of which would, it looked like something out of Harry Potter, didn't it?
It's amazing.
The amount of paperwork in there, and we thought we'd never see our documents again. The way it was filed away. But yes, that took a very, very long time.
That was kind of buff folders on mountains of them piled right up to the ceiling. Real Harry Potter. You're absolutely right, yeah. But it wasn't just that. That was Cochin. Mumbai was when we first arrived in India, and the only way we were able to check in there with a group of other boats was with the help of some, not really agents, but quite VIP people, Indian people there, who had to pay a bribe. Yes, so that was 2010. I'd like to hope that India's a little bit more advanced now.
Bribery actually is something that certainly in Southeast Asia and definitely in Indonesia they've really tried to limit. And in fact, you go into these offices now and sometimes you'll see posters saying, if you are asked by an official for a bribe, do not pay it. We are trying to stamp out bribery and corruption here.
Yep.
That's actually partly why the procedure can take a little bit longer, because when you're paying various fees, they have to issue a receipt. And boy, do they love issuing receipts for anything you buy here. But that process will take a little bit longer, but it's been put in place to try and prevent bribery.
Yes, and in fact in Indonesia specifically, you do not pay at clearance. You are given a piece of paper which you have to take to a bank or a post office. You pay it there and then you take the receipt back. This is to encourage their officials not to take any kind of cash. Yep. The other one to remember is Greece. That was a whole different ball game.
Yes, this was an odd one because Greece, of course, part of the EU, should have been a standard check-in procedure, but they managed to keep hold of their antiquated system, which involved the purchase of a great big foolscap 50-page document that was supposed to be stamped by the various officials. No other country in Europe did this, but Greece insisted on doing it. And we talked to many people who said really they didn't have a right to do it. They were supposed to be in line with the EU to make checking in easy, but it wasn't. It was a pain in the backside.
Yes, it wasn't. In those days we were members of the EU, so we should have just flown straight through. I think I got a little bit cross.
Oh, that's unusual.
Then a couple of other funny ones I just want to mention. In Eritrea, we were met by a bloke on a little bicycle who'd bicycle off and then come back with a document, and then we'd go to somebody's house. That took all day to do, but had we not met him, you had to wait another 5 days before he came back. So that was quite fun.
I think it took him 5 days just to cycle up the mountain back home.
I know. He couldn't believe there was about 7 or 8 boats there. And Sudan, even more strange. This is before it divided, a long time ago. In Sudan, we were met by a bloke in white flowing robes who took American dollars from us, and we just stayed as long as we like. No passports were looked at.
Yes, we don't quite know what happened there.
No.
But he was the official person there, because I have spoken to people more recently who went through and met the same man. He's a known person there, but how things are smoothed through for yachties, I've no idea. We didn't ask any questions. As far as we were concerned, we had done it officially.
Yes, and we were able to travel around. We went to Port Said and stuff like that, and yes, no problem. So you never know what's going to happen. And one of the things we want to say to you now is that rather than being afraid, think of it as an adventure.
It's always an adventure, definitely. You have to put aside that one day, and sometimes it may be more than one day, but it's going to be up to a day to check in or check out. Quite often checking out is even longer. So just go with it. Go with the flow and just see it as something new and different and exciting.
Yeah, we've had some really quite fun ones, haven't we?
We've ended up in one place that we checked out of only recently, eating chocolate cake in the harbour master's office.
Yeah, that was very nice. Okay, so down to the nitty gritty. Let's start with before you even arrive in the territorial waters of this new country you're visiting. We need to talk about flags.
Okay.
Oh, it's a moot subject. It's
Yes.
quite interesting. I'm holding in front of me all my notes, and I've been investigating this, and some of the ideas that we had, they're just not definite. Anyway, but the one thing that is for sure is the courtesy flag.
Mm-hmm.
You do need to fly a courtesy flag, and generally, pretty much all the sources I'm reading say you must put it immediately you enter territorial waters, and it goes on the starboard side.
Now that's interesting because, okay, so tell me, you've got the courtesy flag, and then of course you've got the quarantine flag,
Yeah.
or the Q flag, which is the yellow flag, which
Yeah.
you fly before you have checked in.
Correct. So that should also go up in territorial waters. That means anyone officials who sees you, or in fact any other vessel, will know that you have just arrived and you haven't gone through quarantine yet.
But some people say you should not fly your courtesy flag until you've taken your Q flag down.
Yeah, I think that somebody told us that, but I cannot find that written anywhere on the internet. I've tried, all kinds of resources for it, and I think that's something somebody just decided.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think about it, as soon as you enter somebody's country, putting your courtesy flag up is a courtesy.
Correct.
It's saying, I recognise I'm in your country and I regard your country as important, and here's your flag right at the top.
Okay, so it's courtesy flag first, then Q flag?
Yeah, well, this is another moot point. There is no definitive answer as far as I can see. I found sources who say different things. Practical boat owner recently said if you're not quite sure, you could even put it on the port side. High.
Yes, you mean
Yeah.
the Q flag?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
I guess it's just with the courtesy flag, it tends to be on the starboard side and it goes above all other flags, including your house flags. With the Q flag, all you're doing is telling people visually, I have yet to check into your country, I am in quarantine and I haven't done my paperwork yet. That's all you're saying.
I think that's the point.
So
I think we get too hung up on all the niceties. You just
Okay.
need to be showing it.
All right, let's not get hung up on it then. What's next?
Well, just going back to the courtesy flag, do you remember in Turkey and in Malaysia, they got very angry if your courtesy flag wasn't in perfect condition?
They actually had officials who would come round to the marinas and check your courtesy flag, and if you had a shabby courtesy flag, they would fine you.
Yeah, that was in Turkey. Cool. Yeah, that was, so you really looked after your flag. And then in Sabah, in Malaysia, where we were for 2 years, our friend Alvin would come along and give us a new one now and again.
Yes, I think that was his polite way of saying, oi, your courtesy flag's looking a bit tatty, put up a new one.
So the other flag that we all fly all the time is the ensign.
Do we?
You can talk about that.
Well, since putting a solar panel on the back of the boat, we can no longer fly our ensign. So I'll be honest, we've been a bit lazy, and I know that's going to upset quite a few people out there. But to me, I'm less bothered about the ensign to tell people where I'm from, and I'm more bothered about flying the courtesy flag in the country I'm in.
Yeah, we've never been so far, touch wood, and no one's ever said anything about it.
I bet you if we went back to the UK,
yes.
we would get pulled up on it.
Well, it's maritime law there, and you will get fined if you don't fly it.
There we go.
UK for you. That's why we're here.
Did you know that liking and subscribing on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts helps us to get noticed? Go on, give us a helping hand.
So next thing to think about is ports of entry. And this is something that people worry about. They want to know what they are and how you find them and which ones you choose. So these are the only places in the country where you're allowed to check in, and really they should be the first place you go. And in some cases they do insist that you go to the nearest one. You can't choose which port of entry you want. However, in practical terms, we don't really stick to that, do we?
Go on. What do you mean by that?
Well, if we were going to, say, from Langkawi up into Thailand, know this area well, we used to go always to Phuket, occasionally to Krabi, but in fact the closest port of entry was Satun, but it wasn't very useful to go there.
No, it's going in the wrong direction,
Yeah.
and it was difficult to get to
Yeah.
with shallow waters, I seem to remember.
They didn't really mind though. Depends on the country. Just look at what the regulations are.
Well,
it's up to you.
I think, you know, in somewhere like Phuket and around that area, there are so many yachties and they have had to deal with so many situations. They're quite, relatively speaking, quite flexible.
Yeah, they are. You'll find out with each country what it's like. So basically, how do you know where they are? Several ways of doing it. Go on to the embassy website. That is the definitive first-hand place for information. It will tell you where the ports of entry are. You can get help if you have an agent. If you've got yourself an agent, the agent will help you. They'll send you a list, which is what happens with us in Indonesia. These are all the places you can check in, check out. Noon site, if you haven't heard of Noon site, can you explain that to people?
Well, it's a website created for yachties. It is managed by an admin team who we should always thank because they work tirelessly to make sure that all information pertaining to cruising in every country in the world is kept up to date.
Yeah, so you can look up the country you're planning to go to and it will have a list of the ports of entry. But don't use that as definitive because it may not be completely up to date.
Yeah, to be fair, the admins are relying on yachties to give them updated information, which of course is changing all the time. Only recently we have discovered there is a new port of entry in Indonesia, which potentially could affect our exit.
I think it's a really good one.
Yeah.
We're waiting to hear from a friend who's going up there now to find out how he gets on.
Yes, but we didn't know about this until another yachty had either posted it on Facebook or, well, we certainly met someone and spoke to in person who told us about it. So, yeah, local knowledge, that's the next area to go to. Speak to other yachties and use forums. There is a Facebook group, for example, for Southeast Asia where the information is going to be very current. So when a new port of entry opens, you can pretty much guarantee someone's going to write about it almost straight away.
Yes, and when we say local knowledge, we don't mean the local knowledge in the place you're visiting, because obviously you don't necessarily going to get that, but usually in the place where you're leaving from, there are people that have come from there or are going there. They'll have lots of things to tell you as well. So, you know, talk to people, find out what's going on. Just to reiterate here, there are different types of ports of entry. They're not all great big shipping container ports. Some are quite small, you know, 1 or 2 man band. Some are marinas. So,
yep.
You know, in Lombok, both the marinas are registered ports of entry, and it makes life much easier. You just turn up, it's all done in the marina. We used to do that at Sabana Cove in Malaysia, didn't we? It's nice there. The other thing to remember is if you're coming into a port, certainly a big port, radio through, because they're going to see you and wonder who the hell you are and what you're doing there. So you normally let them know, don't you?
Yes, and so some ports will have a dedicated channel, more so the case with marinas, but at the very least just communicate on 16 and ask to speak to harbour port control.
Yeah, and they may be able to answer your questions about where to go, what to do and where they want you to anchor, because there might be a designated quarantine area, for instance. So just before we go on, I've got a little thing here. Even after you're in and you've been cleared into a country, once you're in that country, some of them demand that you check in and out each time you go to a different area.
Yeah, we didn't know about this when we first got to Malaysia. We were happily cruising up and down the coast for, I think it was something like 3 years. Can you believe that? 3 years we were going up and down the coast before someone said to us, did you check in locally? And we said, well, what are you talking about? Well, it turns out that every port of entry you must check in and out of, even if you have already checked into that country.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a pain.
It's a bit of a pain, yes.
But just be aware, they might get cross with you if you don't. And they then started doing it in Thailand. They don't in Indonesia, it's a big country, and you can go where you like without worrying about that too much. So the main elements of clearance. I just wanted to let everyone know, if you don't already, that CIQP is something you'll read about all the time, and it stands for Customs, Immigration, Quarantine and Port Control, your 4 main areas. Sometimes they'll come to your boat, and sometimes you have to find them on land, don't you?
Yes. Oh, we've had many a time they've tried to come to the boat, well, and successfully come to the boat. I'm thinking of one particular time we came to an island. We actually went ashore on the dinghy first, and we were told, oh, we need to come to your boat. So we went back to our boat, and half an hour later they turned up with this massive 3-story motorboat, and they had travelled, what, 200 metres from where it was docked. And it was all a display of, don't know, power or... the guy was obviously very proud of his motorboat that he rarely got to use.
Yeah, I think he was just proud, and it was a great opportunity to come out and use it, you're right, but you said no.
I said no. I mean, you as your boat owner, don't forget, you know, your boat is your territory. And I just said to him, as he was trying to come along outside, I said, no, this is just not practical. We've got solar panels, you know, you're going to trash our boat by trying to tie your boat up alongside. I said, if you wouldn't mind, please go back, tie your boat up. I'll come and pick you up in the dinghy. And they did. They were obliging. Yeah,
they were. So that was good, and that was a great example of them coming to you. The other good one was the Maldives. I loved the Maldives. You know, tiny little island nation with not very much, and we were met by the agent and members of all 4 quarters, weren't we, when we got there?
Yes, in their bright, shiny boots. They were very well dressed, very well presented. But again, I asked them, please, would you mind taking your shoes off when you come on the boat? And we insist that anyone, I don't care, the king could turn up with his shoes on, and I'll ask him to take them off. Poor guys, you know, they took their boots off to reveal socks with holes in them, and they felt a little bit embarrassed, but I think they were used to it. But that was great, because the agent who was with them came along with an iPad or a tablet that had internet connection, because of course we didn't have a SIM card for the Maldives, and he said, here, keep it for the night.
So it was going, yeah, above and beyond. It was just a really nice touch. We suddenly were able to keep in contact with everybody, and they were all lovely, and it was very sweet.
But the point was, we did the whole CIQP on the boat in one go, which was great. That
was perfect. But it's not always that easy. Sometimes you have to go on land, and when you go on land, you may have to travel for miles between the offices.
Yes, I remember the first time we did this, it was in Turkey, and I got a bit perturbed by the fact we were having to get taxis and buses to travel between the 3 main offices. And of course, now I realise with hindsight, that was actually quite a luxury, being able to check in the space of just a few hours, compared to some places where you're having to take all manner of transportation to get between these locations. And of course, these offices, they'll close for lunch, they'll close for holidays, they may only see you in the mornings. So it's always a good idea to get up early and try and get as much done first thing in the morning.
Yes. The other question I think people have is, how do you know where all these offices are? It can be sometimes a little difficult to find them, but obviously Google Maps.
Yeah, and also understand the order in which you do these. And that can change. Sometimes we've turned up at one office and they said, oh no, you need to go to this office first. The point is, these people are helpful and they will point you in the right direction. So if you are absolutely clueless, just turn up with all your paperwork at one of the offices and say, do I start here? If not, where do I go first? And they'll be able to point you in the right direction.
Yeah, they'll tell you where it is, give you the address and tell you which order. And the order changes when you clear out. Remember that. Okay, so that's finding the place. Just going back to what we said earlier about dress code. So we do need to think about this both on land and on your boat. So if you're on your boat and you know they're coming out to you, and if you're a woman, you're perhaps wearing a little bikini and you're shirtless as a bloke, don't meet them like that.
Don't think that wearing a bikini is going to excite the men, which I'm sure it will, but in many countries it's insulting. It is an insult to show bare skin, especially to that degree, wearing a bikini. So I tend not to wear bikinis when the officials come on board.
No. It's a shame. You don't go topless either.
No, I don't even wear vests when I'm in town. I always cover up, and well, as you know, I tend to wear shirts anyway. But for me, when I go into offices, it's long trousers more often than not, especially in Asia, and covered up toes. So I tend not to wear flip-flops or sandals. I'll wear walking boots, and even trainers is, as far as they are concerned, is more respectful than open-toed sandals.
Yeah, get the information before you go. So in town is very different to being on your boat. On your boat, you just need to cover up and be reasonably smart, but you haven't got to worry about shoes or anything. But in town, we know countries where if you don't wear shoes, you won't be allowed in, Malaysia being one of them, and long trousers in Indonesia won't be allowed in. I think it was the same in India.
Oh, I'm sure it would have been. I mean, we've had so many stories of yachties being turned away, or friends who have observed, and not just yachties actually, just tourists. And in fact, I think tourists are probably more guilty of this. I mean, land-based tourists. Yachties are kind of used to these procedures, but especially in touristic places like Bali, we've heard so many stories of tourists turning up in bikinis and tight cut tops or no tops, and just being continually put to the back of the queue.
Yeah, I think generally just dress smart. Yeah, anywhere in the world, not just here.
If you say so.
So I mentioned that there's lots and lots of documents. This isn't a definitive list, but I have got a little list here to think about, and we'll put it in the blog post, so you don't need to keep stopping and starting and writing it all down. So here it is. So this is about minimising the delays, being prepared, and minimising your own anxiety, because you've got everything there. So these are what you must have: passport with a visa if required, boat registration certificate, port clearance certificate, boat insurance policy, free pratique, a bit more about that when we get to quarantine, your MMSI number, and proof you have AIS capability. So that was quite interesting in Phuket, wasn't it? Passport sized photos, take loads of those, have a crew lists with you, and a ship's stamp.
Sorry for interrupting, but while I've got you here, if you like what we do and you want to support us and become a Patreon, or join us on FTB Mates, or even drop a quid in the rum fund, go to followtheboat.com/pub. Of course, come to the pub.
Immigration. We love immigration, don't we? They're always the friendliest of the officials when you check in. It's really important to have your passport with you, obviously, but more importantly is to make sure that it's valid for at least another 6 months when you come to check in.
Yeah, 6 months minimum. Some countries require more.
And also make sure you have enough spare pages, because you very quickly fill up your passport with stamps and seemingly ridiculously amount of stickers and pieces of paper, and sometimes they staple things to your passport, which is really annoying and they're not supposed to do, but they do it. So your passport does fill up quickly, so make sure you've got plenty of pages free.
In the UK, we can get these extra fat passports, so if it's available in your country, we really recommend as a cruiser you get the nice big fat ones with as many pages as possible, because just going in and out of somewhere can use 2 pages.
Don't lose it.
Yes.
We know people have lost their passport and it causes no end of problems. Actually, I know one guy who sunk his boat, sadly, and of course in the emergency he'd just checked out that country, but in the emergency he got rescued by a fishing boat and taken back to the country he'd just checked out of. They didn't care that he'd just lost his boat. They created so many problems because he didn't have his passport on.
No.
And he's there in the office saying, my boat's just sunk. All my possessions are now at the bottom of the sea. They made it really difficult for him.
They probably repatriated him.
Can't remember the outcome, but just goes to show you how important your passport is. Do not lose it.
And if you are going to lose it, have it in the cloud, as we've said.
Yes.
You know, really important that you can gain access to it.
And by the way, when you do a digital copy of your passport, you should copy the front cover, even though it's the same on every passport from that country. Obviously the first page and the last page, but also your visa as well. Photocopy your visa.
Have it all there so you can use somebody else's phone and get to it and show, you know, in a situation like him. So we'll go on to visas now. This is something that really exercises people. They worry about this. It's a very difficult one to talk about because you can't generalise. Every country is different and every country you're going to is different, and you put the two together, there's all kinds of different, you know. So first, there are many kinds of visas, obviously. We as cruisers generally, on the whole, need a tourist visa because we're tourists. Unless you're going there on official business or you're taking a retirement plan or something like that, you're going to get a tourist visa. They vary in length depending on your nationality and what the country does. So all of that is about preparing beforehand. That's what I would say. You can have a look on the embassy webpage to see what the different visa possibilities are. You can work with your agent to find out what the different possibilities are. But there are two major differences. There's a visa on arrival and there's getting a visa beforehand. Visa on arrival is very straightforward. It just means you turn up and you get a visa for whatever length of time it is.
It's basically the same as if you were flying to a country on your 2-week summer holiday. Exactly the same procedure.
It's usually shorter than a pre-arranged visa in advance. So for instance, here in Indonesia, you get 30 days on arrival if you have a UK passport, and you can extend it for a further 30 days. So you've got 60 days in effect as soon as you get here, which is enough obviously for most tourists. But for cruisers, we like to go for a little longer. So we go usually, well, that's what we've always done, is we look for a visa in advance.
But neither of these is a prerequisite.
No.
You know, on your boat. Just because you got a boat doesn't mean to say you have to get the visa in advance. You can turn up with your boat and get the visa on arrival as well, assuming, of course, in the case of Indonesia, you only plan to spend a maximum of 60 days here.
Yes. You will still have to check your boat in. We're coming on to that in a minute.
Yes.
So there will be all that palaver, but very easy if you haven't got to do the pre-visa stuff. Now, to get a visa to come to a new country, generally you go to that country's embassy in the country where you are before you leave. So we used to go in Langkawi. We would go to the Thai embassy, which was actually based in Penang. We'd get our 3-month Thai visa in Penang. We'd turn up in Thailand, allowed to stay for 3 months. If we didn't do that, we could still turn up in Thailand, but it was only 30 days.
I thought it was in KL, not Penang.
Could do either. We did either.
Did we do it in Penang?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. There we go. I don't remember that.
You can do either. There was always that big race from the ferry down to the thing and then back out to the agent, and they would go off and do it. I don't know if you remember. But
Yes.
anyway, but you can. That's what you do. You do it in your country, the country you're staying, before you go. You've got to prepare it beforehand. In Indonesia, you can now do it online with an agent.
If you're lucky. I mean, in an Ambus, when we tried to check in, it was supposed to all be done online, but they didn't have internet connection.
No.
Imagine the difficulties of trying to do all the official paperwork and the office doesn't have internet.
They've been trying for years to get this up and running in Indonesia. It's a lot better than it was when it
Oh
started.
yeah, it's much easier now, much easier.
So think about that. How long you're going to stay will determine which kind of visa you want. So both still require you bringing the boat into the country, not just yourself. Frequency, I've written down here in my little notes. In the olden days, you could stay in the same area indefinitely by flitting back and forth from one country to the other. So when we were based in Turkey, we could stay for 90 days in Turkey, and then we would just nip across to a Greek island. Hardship, wasn't it? Check out of Turkey into Greece, and then we'd check out of Greece and go back to Turkey and stay for another 3 months. And there were people doing that indefinitely.
We also did it between Malaysia and Thailand. Very popular run. Langkawi, check out to Langkawi, go up the coast 120 miles to Phuket and check in there. And it was 3 months, 3 months, 3 months, 3 months.
Yeah, and there's people doing that for years. It was the good old gravy days. However, those two countries, and probably others now, have changed the rules a little bit, and they will only allow you in their countries for a certain amount of time within another certain amount of time. It might be 2 months out of every 3 you have to be out of the country, something like that. And of course the really big one is Europe.
Do we even want to go there?
I think
We should explain to people who are not British or even European. Pre-Brexit, as part of the Schengen Agreement, we could travel between any country within Europe with ease and with no limitations on how long you spent in these countries.
Yeah, we were EU members. UK was part of the EU, and it was easy peasy. And what we had really planned to do at the end of our cruising days was to end up in the Med and just live a lovely life in the Mediterranean.
Not so anymore. Post-Brexit, we can no longer do this. All we can do now is, now correct me on the figures here, you spend a certain amount of time in a country, and then when you leave, you cannot return to that country for 180 days. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we haven't actually done this, but from what I understand, what I've read is you go into the Schengen, which covers 27 countries. You check in at one of those countries, and that then gives you 90 days and you don't have to. You can go beyond that country. You can go anywhere in those 27 countries for 90 days. Then you've got to get out, and you can't go back for another 90 days. So basically, out of every 180 days, you can stay for 90 days. So we're like everybody else who's non-EU.
Yeah, thanks Brexit.
Yep.
Thank you very much indeed. I would say though, there are means and ways of getting around this.
Yeah.
So for example, we know that okay, Turkey is a separate example, but you can spend an extended period of time in Turkey if you get a contract in a marina which counts as residency.
Right.
So there are various residency and retirement arrangements that you can have in all these countries. Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, they all have these slightly different agreements, but it often involves some kind of investment on your behalf or a certain income in your bank. They all differ. If you plan to spend longer than the standard visa time in the country, then they are worth looking into, and we're not going to go through them here.
No, just check yourself, but there are plenty of them around. I mean, Malaysia's quite a good one. Before we leave this particular bit, we do need to just talk about, if you go into a country and you leave, but you leave your boat there, just think about it. Occasionally, well, quite a lot of countries now, when you return to that country, they want to see your outward ticket. This is what most tourists have to do. So you come into Thailand, you plan to spend 30 days or 3 months there, but immigration, when you're leaving, we need to see your ticket. You've got to prove that you're planning to leave. Of course, us on boats, we can't, can we? We don't have a return ticket. So what we've done in the past is we've got a marina or a boat yard to write a letter explaining the situation.
And normally this is perfectly acceptable in places like Lombok, where we are, and even Jakarta. They are used to boat owners coming in and out, and coming in by plane and then leaving by their boat. So providing you have that letter that explains in no uncertain terms, yes, this person's boat is here, they left by plane, but they will be exiting by their boats, then it's not a problem.
The other thing is to probably take your certificate, your boat certificate with you as well, have that to show them. There was a strange thing going on in Thailand, and this may happen in other countries, that if you left your boat behind when you went off on holiday or home for a few months, you had to pay a bond. Do you remember that? It
was expensive as well. It was a lot of money. Well, I say a lot of money, I think it was about £200 sterling. You got it back. So that wasn't the issue. It was a bit of a pain having to go through the correct procedure, because you could only do it through a certain bank and you had to get receipts, blah blah blah, and you had to do this before you left the country. And the reason why they're doing this, of course, is because some people left the country and never returned, and so they then have to deal with a rotting boat, left washed ashore on their beach, and they have to deal with that. So this is a way for the authorities to get around that problem, or one way of dealing with that situation. So yes, in Thailand, and it's only been Thailand so far, we've had to pay that bond.
Yes, but it may happen elsewhere. Things may change, so keep a lookout for that.
Because I think it's worth explaining though, it's because when you entered into the country, you entered on your boat. So the official documentation will say that you are currently on that boat. When you leave and you go by plane, you are basically relinquishing your responsibilities of that boat. You are saying, I'm leaving my boat behind, and I'm therefore putting the boat, you are now responsible for the boat. Here is £200 as a bond for you to be responsible for my boat while I'm not on it.
Yeah, they won't do anything if anything would happen to it.
They're not going to do any maintenance on your boat, but I'm just talking, this is how it works officially.
Right, okay. The other thing that just occurred to me while we're talking about this is, if you leave your boat for any length of time, just make sure your insurance covers it. If you're going to be on land, or if it's going to be hauled out or in a marina or at anchor, are you insured? For instance, we would not be insured to leave our boat at anchor under our insurance policy.
No, also don't forget, some countries only allow your boat to stay in for a certain amount of time. In Malaysia it's pretty much indefinite. In Thailand it was 12 months, but you could extend it, and in Indonesia it is 3 years maximum. After which you're going to end up having to pay duties on your boat. So again, every country is different.
Yes. One other thing, we had a story from a very good friend recently about returning to Thailand after, I don't know, a couple of years, and being thrown in jail. Do you want to explain what happened? We're not trying to put you off, but we're just saying how important it is to do certain things.
Yes. What had happened, it turned out, was that many years ago, I say many years ago, it was about 3 years ago, when he had left a boatyard and checked out in that part of Thailand, they hadn't done the correct paperwork. So he didn't have the correct paperwork. But as far as he was concerned, and as far as the people who did the paperwork were concerned, he had legally left. He then went to a number of other countries. He went back to Australia, he's been through Indonesia, maybe Malaysia as well. So he travelled all around. He then flew back to Bangkok, back into Thailand, where the authorities looked at all of his previous paperwork and said, hey, hold on a minute. You never checked out of Thailand correctly 3 years ago. As far as we're concerned, you've been in Thailand for the last 3 years. And of course, he said, but that's ridiculous. Look at my passport. You know, I have evidence that I've been in other countries since then. No, they took a hard line on him and they threw him in jail for the night.
Yeah, so that, I mean, that's a real extreme. We've never heard that happen before. But I suppose the only lesson learned there is double check your paperwork when you leave. Just make sure that you can see that you have been stamped out properly, the date is correct, all that sort of thing. Just do it as a matter of course. As soon as you get your passport back, just double check. Oh yeah, that's okay. That's clearly a stamp out. You know.
That story, by the way, is not a reflection on Thailand. It is a reflection on the different types of officers that you will have to deal with. He obviously just got he had a bad day. He got a bad officer. If it had been another day, he probably would have been fine and could have explained his way through it.
I'm 99% sure it wasn't him, because we know him. He's a very well seasoned traveller and he knows exactly how to behave. So very, very sad, but he's never going back to Thailand, is he?
Yeah, that's it. He's burnt his bridges.
Okay, so we're talking about, we've done us, we've done the visas, we've done the passport. So now let's start looking at the boat. So the first thing probably that you would be expected to do is to visit the quarantine department. That's where the boat starts being checked in, and you can't do anything until they remove the yellow flag. We've had so many different types of quarantine. Some places there is no quarantine department.
Yes, quite often it can get rolled into the other departments. Quite often you're actually only checking into 3 physical locations rather than 4, because quarantine is done at the same time. Interestingly, it's always the harbour master who has the poshest, nicest office with the best views and the AC, and the quarantine is shoved down some back alley somewhere. I don't know what it is, but I think it's almost like quarantine is an afterthought.
Yeah, I remember one which was a little shack around the back of a hospital. Yeah. Do you remember?
Yeah.
So in order to get your yellow flag down, you've got to pass quarantine. And if it's not done there, it's done usually in customs or harbour master. But anyway, you are issued with a free pratique. We've only really had this, I think, in Indonesia, is it?
Yeah, in Indonesia they're a bit more up on the whole quarantine process, which came as a bit of a surprise, I think, because we'd got so used to not having to deal so much with quarantine. But it is one of the official steps that is required to come in.
So really they're interested in health. And in our experience so far, it's been really, really simple and nothing much has happened. But if you consider somewhere like Australia, where quarantine is massive, and the same in the UK, they come on board, they look at everything, they look at you. It's a really big deal in those countries. So find out where you're going, find out what you've got to do. So once you've done all that, fine, you've got your pratique, which is usually a little book which you keep with you on the boat, which they stamp when you leave, and you have it ready for the next country, because they may want to see that you've got a free pratique from the previous country. So hold on to that if you get one. Right, the next one is customs. They're the police. They have loads and loads of rights. They can do anything they like, really. They can come on your boat, they can open everything, go into all your little secret dark places and look for stuff.
Well, you say they are the police. I think what you mean, they are like the police. Yeah. But actually, as I understand it, customs are above the police in terms of what they can and can't do on your boat. They have all these rights that actually the police don't have.
No, they can come on. You know, you don't have to be asked on, and it doesn't have to be a reason to go on. The reason is simply that you're there asking customs to clear you. So we've had some quite finicky inspections actually on the boat, and we've had people not coming on the boat not bothered at all. But they're looking for the obvious things, like as you would know as you go through an airport, narcotics, firearms, animals, are you trying to smuggle in some kind of animal, and plants and food, both of which, you need to think about as a cruiser, because a lot of countries don't let in certain foods.
Yes, that's very true. What about your porn collection?
Yes, I have to lock that away in a very secret place. Certainly here, they wouldn't like it at all.
I don't know, maybe they would.
It would certainly be confiscated. Sometimes you get confiscation, but sometimes you get fines. And sometimes you get thrown in jail, depending on what it is.
I don't think we have ever had any of those things. The only thing I can think of is an Oman, when they will come down and lock up your booze cupboard while you're going through the whole checking in procedure.
Yeah.
I seem to remember.
Yeah.
Because booze, don't forget, is one of those things that the reason why they're looking at your booze and checking is to make sure that you're not taking it ashore and selling it and giving it to the local people.
Particularly in countries that are dry, that don't have alcohol.
Yes. But they understand that yacht is like a drink or two,
Yes.
and that you will have a booze collection. So,
but I think that they would be surprised at how much.
this is why quite often you have two booze collections. You have your public booze collection, which is in a cupboard that you can show in the saloon, a couple of half-drunk bottles of wine and the odd few cans of beer. But your secret stash is, we shouldn't be saying this, should we?
They're not stupid, they know. I remember when we got to the Maldives, we were sitting around the cockpit, and one of the guys, customs guys, turned to me. He said, and do you have alcohol? And I looked him straight in the face, said no. And he smiled at me and just ticked. Because he knew he had alcohol, because he then went on to say, you must not give any alcohol to local people, you must not take it on land. So that's all they were concerned about. They just didn't want us to give it to anybody, and certainly not sell it. I mean, that's obviously out of the question anywhere in the world. But they just want to make sure that you're sensible.
I think it's unusual to get a hard time from any of these people, apart from immigration sometimes, because they understand that they represent the country that you are checking into. So they don't want to leave a bitter taste in your mouth, coming aboard and giving you a really hard time. Yeah. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. I'm sure there'll be plenty of yachties out there who have had a hard time. But I would say on the whole, it's a pretty painless procedure. It's just an inconvenience from a time point of view more than anything.
Yes, and if you are dressed appropriately and you are,
polite, deferential.
Yes. It's usually a very nice experience, particularly on the boat. They enjoy being on the boat.
Well, hey, look, there is one person locally here who has been following us on YouTube. Yes. And when we went back to see him a few months later, he was all over us. He was in charge of taking the photos for the official documentation, but he then got his own phone out to take selfies and what have you with us. So, we've got a friend.
Yeah, really useful friend. The other thing I do want to talk about is firearms. Now, we're Brits, we know nothing about guns, but we do know a lot of people from America follow us, and you guys do know about guns. So, obviously we don't have anything like that on the boat, but we do know that yachties, some have firearms on the boat. It's this is different to even drugs. If you're found having firearms on your boat, all kinds of things can happen to you in the wrong country. Perhaps the least important thing is it might be confiscated or possibly locked up in the customs house while you're in the country. But you could be thrown in jail and you could be repatriated. Think about it. Very hard if you're going to carry firearms. We can't advise on that because it's not something we think about. But I'm sure that there will be all kinds of information out there about where you can and can't go if you've got firearms aboard.
Don't look at me. I'm keeping my lips sealed. I'm going to refuse to be judgmental on this subject because it is a can of worms. But yes. All I'm going to say is that we don't have this problem.
Yes. It will affect the countries you're going to visit, that's for sure. So do think about it beforehand.
Yeah, I know that the Maldives is actually quite a straightforward place to check in your firearms because quite a lot of people, especially with the last decade or so of piracy, were leaving the Maldives to go up the Red Sea. So it was quite normal for armed guards to come on board boats in the Maldives. So the authorities were quite used to dealing with firearms. Conversely, we know of one yachty who was not American actually, he was European, who tried to get into a country near here I'm not going to mention with his firearms. I think he even thought he was doing the right thing by presenting them.
He did.
Not realising this was completely illegal and he got banged up.
Yeah, so I mean, he thought, oh, well, I'll show them I've got this, and it's very good of me, but he hadn't checked beforehand. So that was a lesson learned for him. He's out now. The other thing to think about is medicine. Now, you might be on a regular medicine that you take. It might be for heart or whatever it is. If you've got any prescription drugs of any kind, they are always very interested in those. This is customs. They don't want you selling them, and they don't want you they come under, they're not really narcotics, but they are drugs of a certain value. So make sure that you've got your prescription to show them from the hospital or the doctor or whatever. Just make sure that they are bona fide prescription drugs for your own use.
Yeah, by the way, weed doesn't count as medicinal in their eyes.
Although it's legal in some places over here now. In Thailand, it's legal, isn't it?
Yeah, but I don't know how they would feel about a yachty coming in with a bag of weed. No. I just don't think that would work, even though it's legal. And of course, it's quite a new thing there.
Yeah, don't even do it. There are new rules on antibiotics which are popping up all over the place, so check those before you go as well. Okay, so that's customs. You got through customs. The last one is the port control, or as we tend to call it, the harbour master. This is where you get your port clearance. Now, Jamie mentioned this earlier, but we've got to reiterate the importance of the port clearance.
This is where you get your port clearance when you exit the country. Yes. We should be saying it is where you present your port clearance when you come into a country. Apart from your passport, your port clearance is your single most important document. This is proof that you have left one country when you are entering into another country. If you cannot show that you have legally left the last country when you come into a new country, they will turn you around and say you need to go back to that country to get your port clearance.
And that's pretty bad if you've just crossed the Atlantic.
Yeah.
You really must get your port clearance. You must look after it. And again, copy in the cloud.
Yep. You then hand it over when you enter into a country. So you actually let go of that document and they will take it. I mean, you can keep a copy, but once you're in that country, you no longer need that port clearance. Well, unless, of course, you get approached and badgered and they want to see it, but you'd have a copy. But the point is that you hand that over. So once you're in that country, you haven't got a port clearance, because that port clearance is to show you have left the country. So you only ever have a port clearance on you when you're in between countries.
Yes, yeah, and keep it safely locked away. The other thing that they will want to look at is your ship's registration, and it is a legal requirement all around the world for your yacht to be registered. So double check that you've got it and that it's absolutely plain and straightforward, because they will examine it.
Yeah, an interesting one with us is that we switched over to the SSR, Small Ships Registry.
Yeah.
And so we were carrying this little ship's registration, not realising that it doesn't display the tonnage. And the tonnage quite often is something that they want to see. So if you've got your tonnage recorded somewhere and it's not on your ship's registration, then have that to hand as well.
Yeah, we had quite a do, didn't we, in Malaysia when we showed them the SSR. And no, we said, but this is the UK official registration document for sailboats. There is another one, a Part 1, which is what we originally had, and that did show the tonnage, but it was like 5 times the price. So we thought, well, we don't need it, we'll do the one that everyone else has. So anyway, yeah, have your registration document, make sure it's the official one from your country, so if there's any question at all, they can check it, whatever.
Oh, laminate it.
Yes.
If it's not laminated already, and in fact laminate copies as well. We have a few SSR laminated copies, don't we?
We do, to show to everybody and give away if necessary, because again, here they'll want photocopies of everything.
Yes, a point on photocopying.
Yes.
Make sure you carry lots of copies, as Liz says, of everything, but also make sure that when you go into an office, you know where the local photocopier is, because it could be that you will have to rush off and get copies made.
If you find this topic interesting and would like to continue the conversation, come and join the Follow the Boat Discord community. Look for the link in the description. It's free.
Before we finish with port control, you've got all your photocopies, but just remember you're probably going to have to stamp them all with your ship stamp.
Oh, ship stamp. Every boat should have a ship stamp. All it is the name of your boat and probably your registration number, your boat's registration number, and or your MMSI number as well. You can have a nice pretty wood cutting of your boat as a ship stamp. It doesn't matter what it is, but those are the important things to have on it, because you will be asked to stamp documentation. For example, your crew list. That's one of the documents you'll have to take with you, and they'll want to see you sign it and stamp it in front of them.
Yeah, we didn't get this until we left the Mediterranean and came over on this side of the world. But this side of the world really loves stamps. You can go to town on it. You can have a really good fun one, can't you?
We've seen some beautiful stamps. Yeah.
And you just get them made up at stationers, if you're wondering. They have them all over the place here. You can get them done locally or get them done wherever you are now. Easy to make and quite good fun. So that's the ship stamp. The other thing that Port Control, they will want to check your MMSI number and confirm that you're on AIS, which is very different to how it used to be when we first started. Nobody had AIS, and even when we left the Med in 2009, we were one of only a handful, well, less than a handful of boats that had AIS. But now, I think it's a legal requirement, isn't it?
Yeah, again, it's different from country to country. When we were last in Phuket and we visited what were then the new offices, we actually got invited up into the Harbour Master's office, where they had this huge 90-inch screen showing all of the live active AIS beacons that happen to be on in the bay. And they wanted to see ours as well. And fortunately, we were able to say, yep, there we are, it's on. So they do check it.
It was like being in a James Bond movie with this wall of all this stuff moving around. It was great fun.
But, you know, what is frustrating is that while we are obliged to have AIS, that you will come across many commercial vessels that do not have AIS. It's a little bit annoying, because I think in the UK, it is now a requirement for commercial vessels over a certain size have to have AIS. That's not always the case in these countries. No, but you, as the yachty, more than likely are probably going to need to show your AIS. It's
one of Jamie's bugbears, so we'll just draw a line under that.
Actually, no, I will just tell you, at the time that we crossed Singapore, we accidentally went over the border, which is quite easy to do, but the Singaporean border control are on the case, and they radioed through to us and started saying, you know, please get out. I mean, we'd gone over by literally a metre or so, because it's so busy there.
It's really narrow.
We were trying to stick to the edge and stay out of trouble. Anyway, what they kept saying to us was, we can't see your AIS. And I said, well, it's on. Well, it turns out, actually, we had a problem with our AIS, and you weren't able to see our AIS unless you were 1 metre away from us.
Yes.
But, you know, that's just an example of how you are expected to have it on and working.
Yeah, and you need to prove it. One more thing, insurance. You will need to prove that the boat is insured from a minimum of third party, but I have just read recently that some are requiring fully comp, some countries. Don't quote me on that, but check beforehand. But really, you can't go to many places anymore without insurance of some kind on your boat.
I mean, we talked about doing a podcast on how cruising has changed over the years, and sadly, I have to say, this is one of the things that is changing, is that
bureaucracy.
The bureaucracy is just getting more and more, and it's just, I don't know, it's taken the fun out of some of this adventure sometimes, isn't it? Of course, we're laying this all down for you, and this all sounds doom and gloom. You know, these are procedures that once you get through, it's great. But I know a lot of yachties have been and will be upset at the fact that they now have to have fully comp insurance in some countries.
Yeah, that's quite something. I'm not sure it's happened yet, but I'm reading about, you know, there are movements to do this. And the idea of doing this, cruising around the world, living on your boat, self-sufficiency, the last thing as a yachty you want is bureaucracy, but unfortunately it's there. Live with it, get through it, get out the other side, and then you're somewhere like this, 6 months in all these Indonesian islands, in the tiniest, most remote places on the planet you can only get to on your boat. But you've just got to get through that bureaucracy, and then you can do it. It's all there, and it's not that difficult. A couple of other things. Now, I think you need cruising permits in some countries, and I think that's where Port Control, do they issue them? Do you remember?
Oh, good question. Yes. Well, in KK and Sabah, your cruising permit came from the local government office, which allowed you your cruising rights within their district.
Yes.
So that was another layer that we had to deal with.
I think in Turkey we had cruising permits, you had to pay for them, and we definitely had a cruising permit in the Maldives.
Yes, definitely in the Maldives.
Yeah.
But again, it's different from country to country.
And those were both years ago and could have changed. So if they ask, if they tell you need a cruising permit, prepare to get the checkbook out, because you always have to pay for it. That might happen. So once you've got your port clearance and you're ready to go, everything's checked. It will also include the length of stay for your boat. As we said before, the length of stay for your boat could be way, way longer than the length of stay for you.
Yes.
Interesting.
Keep an eye on it though. You don't want to get caught out with that, because you will have to pay import duties, taxes on your boat if you overstay. Or they could impound your boat. Not saying that will happen, but
It does,
you know.
Yeah, just don't do it. We got 3 years here. How long we got to go?
Oh God, don't even think about it.
In some occasions, we do need to address this. You may delay your departure and arrival. So what I mean is that you'll get into the territorial waters, but you won't actually check in for maybe a week or so. This has happened in Thailand, and it's happened in the Anambas in Indonesia. So, you know, you arrive, you've got everything, you've got all the right flags up and everything, but it's a way, quite a long way to get to the only place where you can check in. So rather than doing overnighters and potentially dangerous weather, most yachties will stop and anchor somewhere and not get off the boat. And most authorities will allow this. What do you think?
Well, by rights, they have to allow you. You're a sailboat under passage, and providing you don't get off the boat, then I'm not absolutely clear on this, but in theory you're not actually breaking the law, especially if you're in archipelagic waters, which are waters that are considered to be sort of international transitory waters. And you'll see waters around Indonesia that are labelled as archipelagic, which allow you to travel through. So when you check out of, say, Belitung, for example, you still have another further 200 miles to go before you've cleared Indonesian waters and crossed over into the Singapore Strait. The authorities on the whole recognise that you're doing this. I think they will have a problem if you are seen to be getting off the boat and going on land and spending time in the local bar when you have checked out. That you can understand, rightly, you are breaking the law there. But I think on the whole, they understand that on a sailboat things take time.
Yes, we found when we first got to Langkawi that Langkawi to Phuket, which is just over 100 miles, they in Phuket would give you a 2-week window, wouldn't they?
Yes, I think you start getting question marks if it's taking you longer than 2 weeks. But they knew that on the whole, the average yachty would take 2 weeks. Now, whether you can do, I did that journey on my own myself in a night, so it can be done quickly. But the point is that they know that they're going to take a little bit of time.
We heard recently of someone in the Anambas, which is part of Indonesia, getting caught out that way because he'd checked out. So he had to get out of the Anambas and he was going on to Malaysia. But he stopped in Jemaja, which is the westernmost island, which has a great safe anchorage, before he then made the full trip out. What happened? I can't remember.
Oh, some local kid who was sort of vaguely connected to the tourist department snitched on him. He actually phoned up the authorities and said, hey, there's a boat here. Has he checked in? Has he checked out? And they said, no, he's checked out. Shouldn't be here. So the harbour master came along and booted him out.
Yeah, it was a shame because that particular place is a really good landing and leaving point for yachts to get ready.
It's an essential landing and leaving spot because the distance between Jemaja and Terempa, which is the capital where you check in, that is a full day or night sail across. So it's expected that boats are going to stop there, either coming in or going out. So normally there's some leeway there. I think it was this one kid just trying to be a bit too officious and with ideas above his station, because he wasn't actually an official person, was he?
No, not at all. He was just getting busy. So, you know, it's just an example really of if you're going to anchor after you've checked out, make sure it's away from the port, definitely, because they do normally expect you to check out that day or the following morning.
Yes.
Let you leave.
They will ask you when you check
Yeah.
out. They will ask you, when are you planning to leave? And your answer should normally be on the same day that you're actually checking out. They understand, however, that you will probably be leaving. It might be a bit late to leave that day, but you will be leaving first thing in the morning at daylight.
Yeah. So there you go. Just be aware of that. Before we finish, we have mentioned agents a few times. I think it's just worth a quick word on agents. Do you use agents or don't you use agents? It's up to you most of the time, but there are some countries that require you to. If you're just doing a visa on arrival, you probably don't, but we do understand that Langkawi now has become quite difficult, hasn't it?
Yes, Langkawi is becoming almost not impossible, but it's not the same place that we landed,
No.
12, 13 years ago. It's quite different. We also know of someone who used an agent in Indonesia, throughout Indonesia, and then got to a certain location where the officials said that they had to then use a local agent to complete his paperwork. I think they were probably trying it on. They knew that their friend could get a tidy little backhander. And of course, this person's saying this isn't a legal requirement. I've been using my agent all over Indonesia, but they insisted on it.
Yes, it's difficult. I mean, you can argue with them. Is it worth potential harassment?
And I guess the other question is, do you need an agent? Well, no, you can do things on your own in most countries, as you say. Some do require you to use an agent, but in countries where you don't need an agent, you can try and do it on your own. But believe me, the agent just helps smooth things over. And in our case here, when we renew our visa, it requires a couple of visits into town, which is a taxi journey and extra expense. And so our agent covers that second journey that we no longer have to make. So they just smooth things over.
We can be far away and she'll just go and sort it all out for us, and it's all done, with no hassle at all to us. So we would definitely say get an agent for Indonesia. I think that would be our suggestion, especially if you're going to get a B211A, which is the advanced visa. So much easier. You need a sponsor to get into Indonesia, so you can use the agent as your sponsor as well and help smooth things for you. I wouldn't bother in Malaysia, would you? I wouldn't bother in Thailand.
No, we didn't do in either.
So a good agent, difficult to find, that's the question. How do you find an agent? Well, they do have them on Noonsite, the website we mentioned earlier. Those are guys that are advertising, but much better, do it word of mouth. So you can use that forum we mentioned earlier, the Sail Southeast Asia forum for this neck of the woods. You just put a post up saying, I'm going to Indonesia or wherever it is, I need an agent, got any suggestions? You'll get a whole load of people who know what they're talking about helping you out. And I should imagine that there are similar forums around the world, probably Caribbean, Mediterranean, I don't know. But get on those forums and get someone to help you. Obviously, meeting someone who's got first-hand knowledge is the best way to go. Quick word on pets before we go. Should you have a pet on board?
Everyone should have a pet on board. Our pets are a bind. We don't want to talk about why you should have a pet. No, let's just concentrate on the fact that we have found, from personal experience, actually having a cat on board has never been a problem with authorities, even in places where we expected it to be an issue. As far as they're concerned, the cat stays on the boat, so it's not an issue. Dogs are a little bit more complicated because in certain countries, dogs are seen as unclean. We have even been through countries like the Maldives where we didn't see a single dog, and I actually only even saw one scrawny little cat in the Maldives. So dogs could be a bit more problematic. Parrots and goldfish, I'm not so sure about.
They're probably all right, aren't they? Yeah, so the reason for bringing it up here is there is another layer of bureaucracy sometimes in some countries if you're bringing an animal in. And in some countries the quarantine is so restrictive and difficult and could possibly end in euthanizing your animal. You need to think very carefully about that. There are pet passports for dogs and cats, but only for certain countries. So look into that. We chose not to go to Australia, New Zealand, or indeed back to the UK with our cat. Just not worth the hassle. So having a pet will dictate to some extent where you go, so think about that. Finally, we're getting to the end of this. Hopefully it has provided you with lots of information and food for thought. And if you've got any questions or comments, and I'm sure we've got things wrong, let us know. Put them in the comments below.
Well, more importantly, go to Discord. We always put a link to Discord. I noticed someone recently in one of our videos said the link was broken. This is because Discord's always changing its link, so we'll make sure the Discord link is correct. And that's where we can have an open chat, and you can ask us more about anything to do with CIQP.
So, in a nutshell, eliminate the stress by ensuring you've done all your research beforehand and you've got all your paperwork shipshape.
Be polite.
Yes.
Always be polite, play it cool, and dress nicely as well.
Choose, sorry.
Go on.
No, all I was going to say was choose one person to represent the boat, which we didn't mention earlier.
Well, we're doing it right now. We're talking over the top of each other, and that's a very good point. I have to literally, physically push Liz away from the counter because she's wanting to get involved in the whole process. And this is, it's irritating for me, but imagine how much more irritating it is for the person behind the counter. So it is much better if one person is the designated communicator with the authorities and the rest take a back seat, and they can be seen but not heard.
Yes, and in fact I'm much better at that now. I don't even go into the offices with you quite often. What we have seen is entire crews all crowding round a booth with one very startled looking official behind who doesn't necessarily speak the language that well, and it really doesn't do you any favours. Just one person. So that is it.
Oh, big subject. We told you it was a big subject, and as I said right at the beginning, you can see now why we've kind of avoided it. It's because there are so many variables here, and really it's up to you guys to do your research. We always say that, but do your research both online and where you can get some local cruiser knowledge as well.
And just remember, people are doing this all the time. It's not scary. It really isn't. You can do it.
See it as an adventure.